Hello again and welcome everyone. I am Benjamin Dolly, the PhillyCHI board chair for 2022, and we're thrilled to have all of you with us tonight for So You Want to Be a UX Researcher. Tonight will be a moderated panel discussion. We are featuring 4 panelists who represent the full UX research career spectrum, from early career to academic research crossover. And we're thrilled to welcome back our esteemed discussion moderator, Charron of Think Company. I also want to mention tonight that the board here at PhillyCHI values all of our members and participants' health and safety above all. Given the rise in COVID-19 cases in Philadelphia, we felt that the only responsible choice for this event was to conduct it in a fully virtual format. And we thank you so much for sticking with us and being here tonight, and for your continued dedication and attendance as we adjust to our new normal throughout this pandemic. And I do want you to know that we do plan on hosting in-person events this year and look forward to seeing each and every one of you in real life as soon as possible. With that said, we'll get this started with a couple of ground rules and some webinar logistics for tonight. By default, all of our attendees will be muted and your video will be off. If you have anything to communicate, we kindly ask that you please use the chat for general discussions and comments. And please use the question and answer feature to pose your questions for the panelists as well. And use the like feature in the question and answer to upvote the best questions so that they're more likely to be answered within our time frame. I do want to note that we will be collecting all of the questions asked tonight in a Google Sheet and making that available to our panelists and our attendees after the event. So if you have a question, have no fear. We'll try to get that answered for you during or after the event. Also would like you to know that this event is being recorded and will be shared online after the event through our YouTube channel, as well as the transcripts for the event as well. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic over to Remi Gurak, our vice chair, to tell you a bit more about who PhillyCHI is. Remi, take it away.
Thanks, Ben. Hi, everyone. I'm Remi Gurak, and as Ben mentioned, I'm the vice chair for PhillyCHI this year. I just wanted to give a little intro about who we are in case you're joining us for the first time. So we are a local chapter of ACM Sig Chi, and we have been in Philadelphia for 15 years, curating networking and educational events for UX professionals, students, and enthusiasts. We're really dedicated to UX knowledge sharing, and we could not do these events without every single one of you spending your time with us. So we really want to thank you for being here and making it possible. As a side note, we are really committed to supporting a respectful environment for our members to come together and talk about UX. So if you witness anything unacceptable or anything that makes you feel uncomfortable during tonight's event, please notify one of the board members privately, either in the chat by typing to one of us directly, or you can reach out to us via email at phillychi@gmail.com. We really encourage everyone new to the group to read our code of conduct, which you can find on our website at phillychi.acm.org. With that, I'm going to pass it on over to Laura to talk about the schedule for tonight.
Thanks, Remi. So I am Laura Coyne, the secretary of PhillyCHI, and we're excited to have you all here tonight. Our main event is a moderated discussion featuring 4 expert panelists representing the full spectrum of UX research experience. Our expert moderator, Phil, will guide our panelists through a series of questions we sourced from you, our audience, when you registered for the event. Prior to kicking off the main event, we would like to recognize our sponsors for making PhillyCHI possible. You'll hear more about them in just a bit. We also want to give all of our attendees a chance to connect during job time, which is coming up next. Individuals who are sharing open roles will have them added to the PhillyCHI LinkedIn page after the event to expand your reach. Additionally, we'd also encourage folks to connect and network in our networking Google Sheet, which is linked in the chat. We see a number of people already adding to it, so feel free to make some new LinkedIn connections with other UXers tonight. And as a heads up, well, a reminder, Ben also mentioned this, but the sheet will only be shared with attendees from this event as an added bonus for being with us. Lastly, after the panel discussion, we'll open up the floor for additional Q&A. So feel free to post your questions in the Zoom as Ben mentioned and upvote what you would like to get answered. We'll also be taking the Q&A and adding it to a Google Doc, which we'll share through a link in an email after the event so that any unanswered questions will have a chance to be answered. This document will remain open until Monday, so feel free to check back periodically. And one more exciting thing, we have a raffle at all of our events. So at the end of the panel discussion, we will be selecting raffle winners who will receive an email from us to collect your addresses so that we can send you a physical copy of our exclusive Rosenfeld books, which you can see here. Very exciting, a lot happening. So I'm going to pass it over to Kieran, who's going to share more about job time.
Thanks, Laura. Hi, everyone. I am Kieran. I am the community coordinator this year with PhillyCHI, and I'm excited to kick off tonight's job time. For those of you joining a PhillyCHI event for the first time, we have job time at every event to connect job seekers with companies that are hiring. And since we're a local chapter, we're focusing on Philadelphia roles this time. So I'm inviting anyone who has a role at their people or companies that are hiring, please raise your hand, and you can also drop a link in the chat. If you raise your hand, then I will unmute you and you can tell a little bit about the role. And I will start with Suzanne.
Yeah, so in the Philly office, Frog is looking for a few folks. If you happen to be very senior in there, we are actually looking for an associate director of design research, of all things. But other roles include a service designer with a more flexible on that level there, a senior program manager, and you can actually look at, there are maybe a couple more on there. Those are the ones that I know for now, but you can always go to frog.co/careers and just click on Philly for the rest of those, or email me at Suzann.Crumbock@frogdesign.com and send along a resume and any interest there. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Suzanne. And let's move on to Sanchita next.
Hi, we have a couple of roles open at Vanguard too. I'll drop a link to the job role in the chat here. But we have a bunch of different roles open, both at the starting level and at senior UX research positions. In Philly, largely in Malvern, because that's where Vanguard's head office is at. And we work in multidisciplinary teams across retail client experiences. So you're going to be able to advocate for our client experience that use our digital experiences every day. So it's really exciting, and it's a fantastic group of researchers that you get to work with. So I'll post a link to the place and you can apply there.
Awesome, thank you. And Phil, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure, thanks. So Think Company we're always hiring, but we have a pile of jobs open, a couple of research positions, a research manager position, as well as positions in project management, regular, just standard design lead, product design positions, as well as a senior content strategist that we're looking for. It's a variety of remote and remote roles. There's a couple of roles that are actually very specific to New Brunswick, New Jersey. If you have any interest, I'll drop a link in chat, and there's one in the spreadsheet as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Phil. And Ben, it looks like I don't have the permission to unmute. Would you like to see if you can do that for Julie?
Yeah, most certainly.
Thank you.
Hey, Julie, how are you?
Good. How are you guys? Thanks so much. My name is Julie Lazarus. I work at Citizens Bank as a design thinking strategist. And we, like everybody else, it sounds like, have a couple open roles, including a researcher, but that would be based in Westwood. We also have a UX UI senior design role that could be remote. And you can do that from anywhere. So I pasted the 2 links for both roles in the chat. Feel free to just ping me if you just wanted to talk about it. I'd be happy just to touch base.
Awesome.
Oh.
Thank you so much, Julie. And
Yeah,
Dan,
thanks.
you
And yeah, Dan,
are
go for it.
up next. Dan,
Okay.
you're on.
Yeah, there we go. So Stack Overflow, we're hiring a couple of research positions for my team, which is community products. So anything stackoverflow.com. We have a senior researcher, which will be 5 years-ish up, just a mid-level, which is 3 years and up. And we'll also be having a research ops coordinator soon, which could be a great role for someone who has some project management experience or has research experience and is looking to kind of get their foot in the door. So if you're anywhere close to any of those, don't let the years put you off. Feel free to contact me. I also put the links in the networking sheet.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you so much, Dan.
And I'm not seeing any more raised hands, but we've got a ton of opportunities in the chat. So I'm going to paste our networking sheet again, because there is a tab for job time. And if people don't copy them in now, we can go through the chat later, but this will be a place to take a look at that later. You'll see that it starts with the networking tab, but then the second one is job time. So if we don't have anyone else, I will, and thank you everyone for sharing your jobs. If you are looking for a job, you can post your LinkedIn here in the chat and a little bit about yourself. And you're also welcome again to use the networking sheet and reach out to any of these people who share their job opportunities. And now I will pass it on to Robin to talk about our sponsors tonight.
Hey there, everyone. I'm Robin, PhillyCHI's treasurer this year. Big thanks to tonight's event sponsors, Think Company and Maze, and as well as our annual sponsors, Think Company, Drexel's College of Computing and Informatics, Rosenfeld, Blue Plate Mines, O3 World, and Vanguard. Thank you, guys, for making these events like this possible. This is through the kindness and generation of our sponsors and donations. If you or your company are interested in learning more about becoming a sponsor, definitely reach out to us at PhillyCHI.org. I'll be happy to talk with you more. So I'm going to pass this on to Kieran again to talk a little bit more about Maze.
Hi, it's me again. I am excited to share a little bit more about Maze tonight. I'm excited because I've used Maze personally, so I'm gonna give the introduction that they shared with us. Did you know only a third of product teams actually do continuous product research? A lack of time, tools, and resources mean user insights are being left in the dark when it comes to building new and amazing products. With Maze, you can shine a light on what your customers really want and make strategic product decisions faster. Maze is a product research platform designed to save your team time and headaches. Trusted by over 40,000 brands, Maze empowers everyone to test rapidly and dive deeper into the product journey. With versatile features from prototype testing to card sorting surveys, Maze empowers everyone to test fast and act faster. Whether you're a UX researcher, designer, or an entire team looking to scale learnings, Maze helps you collect deeper insights to make more user-centric product decisions. And yeah, just on a personal note, I've used Maze, the free version, and it's super powerful. You can do asynchronous user testing. So I'm a fan, so you're welcome to check it out at maze.co. And again, thank you so much for supporting us tonight, Maze. And with that, I will pass it on to Remi to kick off tonight's event.
Thanks so much, Kieran. All right, everybody. So the main attraction that you are here for. So tonight, our So You series is returning we're back by popular demand. And this year we are covering So You Want to Be a UX Researcher, a topic near and dear to my heart. So you will be hearing a moderated discussion from our 4 expert panelists who represent the full UX research career spectrum, from early career to academic research or crossover, as they discuss what it's like to be in UX research. We'll touch on topics such as breaking into the industry, research best practices, researching remotely, which is very important these days, and even more. Moderating our discussion tonight is a very familiar face if you've been to any of our So You events before, Phil Charron from Think Company. He joined Think Company as their second employee back in 2008, and he currently oversees strategy and consultants on new business opportunities. Phil is passionate about expanding the diversity of the design industry. He's been designing, consulting, teaching, and writing about user experiences since 1992. Phil has taught digital design at Philadelphia University, which we now know as Jefferson, from 1995 to 2014, and he was the UX lead on the team that won the Qualcomm Tricorder X Prize in 2017. So without further ado, and without tripping over my words anymore, I'm going to turn this whole thing on over to Phil to introduce our panel.
Thanks so much, Remi. Wow, I didn't realize that my bio mentioned how old I was, but I heard 1992 and I'm like, wow, that's painful. Okay, so this is great. We got through all the intros a lot quicker than I expected, which means that we have a lot more time to extract as much wisdom from our panelists as we can. As everyone mentioned, I think this is the fourth time we've done something like this. We started doing this a while ago with PhillyCHI, when I noticed that some of the folks that I do some career coaching on were really trying to figure, trying to understand how to break into the industry. Often I talk to a lot of people who are going through a career change, not necessarily just entering the industry. And I reached out to the folks at PhillyCHI and said, like, hey, is there something that we can do to help people understand what organizations are looking for, because different organizations are looking for different things. So we've done this for several years. I really enjoy doing this. I love having these conversations. We've got a great panel together for you tonight. And so without any further ado, I thought we should have the panel introduce themselves. And as you introduce yourself, if you can just think about answering letting us know a few things. One, what was your pathway into your current role? Obviously, who are you? Where do you work? What do you do? What was your pathway into your current role? And then also, if you could give us maybe just one little piece of advice about entering the industry. And so I think I'll start off with Suzanne, and I'll try to keep track, Suzanne, of the stuff that you tell us. And if you miss one of my questions, I might come back to you. So.
Yeah, sure, no worries. Thank you so much, Phil. It is a huge pleasure to be here. I love being here, especially because at one time, not too long ago, I was sitting in events just like this at PhillyCHI, listening to the wisdom of Phil Charron and thinking, how am I ever going to break into UX? And I just did not see a path at that point. And here I am years later, and I am happily working in the field, and it's a miracle and it's amazing. And you can do it too, if that's what you want. So I'm really happy to be here to pass any knowledge that I've gotten from my pathway in. I am currently a senior design researcher with a company called Frog. They are a global design consultancy. They really pride themselves on sort of human-centered design and research. I'm super happy to work there. They're part of Capgemini now, so it's a ginormous company, but they do all sorts of really interesting work. And I've been thrown all sorts of things to sink my teeth into, so I'm pretty happy there. But I did not always work in UX. I actually spent 18 years as what you might understand as a reality television producer. I produced unscripted content for TLC, Discovery, Food Network for quite a long time. I had a whole lot of experience with field work, shooting productions in the field, organizing, herding those cats. And then I spent quite a long time in post-production. So using lots of different tools and technology to tell a story. And I thought I did my time there. I was very proud of my career, and I wanted to do another thing. And so I started to consider how I would break into technology. I thought I wouldn't really get very far if I didn't have my hands in code. And I was approaching 40, and I just did not have a lot of time for a graduate program. So my career path was not through academia, but it was through sort of putting together pieces that were time expedient to get there. And it was a lot of networking, a lot of events like this. It was a lot of self-education. It was a boot camp for full stack web development, and everybody I could meet who did UX through every kind of meetup, everything from NNG, the Nielsen Norman Group, that I could ingest and learn, and then you finally eventually get your first break. So that's how I got in there and worked my way up from there. So super happy to be here. Happy to talk about the quirks about how I entered the field, and to help everybody, give them a little a little buoying to say you can do it. You can do it too. I think there were some other things. I think, honestly, Phil, I think the one thing that was very daunting at the beginning with all of the folks, particularly because I wasn't coming through an academic route, that told me, you can't do that. It doesn't work like that. You have to, it's not going to work. You can't get there from here. And while everybody has to find their own path, my biggest advice that I would give to anybody is that you absolutely can. Don't listen to people who tell you negative things. Where there's a will, there's a way, and you can make it work for your unique background. Those people are terrible, and just find a new person to talk to, because there's many amazing people that are generous and will help you get there.
That's great advice. And one of the things I love about our industry is that there's folks who've sort of come in directly through, like, a design education or design experience, and there are folks who've kind of worked their way into it. And I think it just makes the world that we all work in a lot richer. And I think that there's so many things that you can transfer from whatever you were. I did some film video production early on in my career, so I totally get what that, and I think we talked about that at one point, like what that transition looks like. One of my favorite stories about this, about having these conversations, I was touring the Philadelphia School for the Deaf, and one of the teachers came to me and said, I didn't even know that UX design was a thing. And we had a great conversation for a while, and her background and expertise in teaching, young children who have hearing disabilities, I think gave her a great background. She's now an experienced designer, with probably a lot of experience that transfers over into into the work that we do. So that's great to hear, Suzanne. I love hearing about career changers, because I think this is now my fourth career. So you can all do it. So let's switch over to Sanchita. So tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got here, your organization, what you do now, and then your piece of advice for folks who are listening in.
Sure, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Sanchita Gargya. I'm a UX research manager at Vanguard, where I head up our community of incredible researchers that work on our onboarding and invest web experiences for our retail accounts. I've been at Vanguard for about 2.5 years now. And before Vanguard, I was at Comcast. And my background in PhD is in cognition and neuroscience. So I'm one of those people who have had a very academic training as far as research is concerned, and I transitioned over to the industry, and I'm really happy to be here and share everything that I've learned as I transitioned over from academia to the industry. Largely, if I were to sum it up in 2 sentences, I think I did a lot of informational interviews, read up a lot about industry lingo, and just try to educate myself about, transferable skills. So that gets me to my piece of advice, which is don't underestimate your skill set, whatever it might be. I know imposter syndrome is real. Whether you're in academia or elsewhere, everyone feels like an imposter at some point of time. But know your transferable skills. Know that you can translate what you've learned, whichever industry, whichever space you're coming from, into the UX field. That's the beauty of the field. But you just need to know how to translate that in the lingo of the UX field. And so that's the big advice I would give to everyone.
That's great advice, and that's, again, it highlights this idea that we all have so many transferable skills from whatever we do, and I love the fact that we have someone who's sort of got that academic background that has worked their way into it as well, because you need that range of experience. I think I mentioned when we were preparing for the call that at Think Company I think we have one of our first PhDs now working at Think Company, and the fact that we have someone who's got a strong background in statistical analysis makes me feel a lot less of an imposter as an organization, where we were kind of winging the statistical side of things, or actually bringing in a lot of freelancers in the past to do that kind of work. So I think that's great advice. let's switch over to Melanie. So Melanie, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got here. I think you have a very interesting background as you were introducing yourself before we got on the call, and some advice for folks.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Melanie. I'm a Philly-based UX researcher for a tax software company called Vertex. My background is in biology, and like after college, I fell into veterinary medicine and I did hospital coordination for a bit. I think like a lot of folks on this panel and everyone in the audience, my journey to UX research has not been traditional. I, in 2019, realized that I was kind of hopping from job to job, not really feeling fulfilled. I was burned out, underpaid, I was tired, and I started talking to other career changers. I got really curious about UX, and I started a boot camp in 2019, and I finished my boot camp in March 2020. And I've been with Vertex now for about a year, so I'm still pretty new in my journey, and I'm excited to share my experience with you. I guess my one piece of advice is, for me, networking was incredibly valuable. I always recommend anyone to go search people out on LinkedIn who are doing work that you think is interesting, and reach out and see if they have time to talk with you. But with that, I think it's important to show up to these informational interviews prepared. So have your questions ready to go, show up on time, bring a notebook, take notes, and remember to follow up with that person by email or LinkedIn, and just be intentional about staying in touch with them.
That's great advice, and I think that between you and Sanchita, we've heard twice this notion of sort of networking, informational interviews, and I think that's so important. It's an interesting thing because like networking can be a double-edged sword. Like we know that we want a little bit more, we want more diversity in our industry. This is a challenge, and if you're I don't know if people are aware, like in a workplace, people often tend to cluster around folks who have the same background or the look and seem like them. And but on the flip side of it, most of the folks that I know in this industry, whether they're in a leadership position or they've just started out in their career, nobody would ever turn down someone saying, "Hey, I'm trying to see where I fit in this industry. Would you take some time and have a conversation with me?" So I've never turned down an offer for that. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time for me to line it up because there's a bunch of people that are asking me about that, but I'm sure everyone on the panel feels the same way. And I'm really glad they put this networking spreadsheet together that you can click over to in the chat, because I think that's a great opportunity for you to find folks that you may want to chat with and see you can break in. So, great advice in the informational interview. And I love the be prepared thing, because there's nothing worse than agreeing to talk to someone and then you get up on a Zoom call and they're just staring at you. So we're here to answer your questions. So you gotta actually come to the table with the questions, but that's great. So I'm sorry, Adam, I kind of went off on a little tangent there, but I don't want last but not least, we've got Adam Dove over here. So same routine, Adam, give us a bit of your background.
Yeah. No worries. Thanks, Phil. I'm glad to be here. My name is Adam Dove. I'm a UX research lead at a startup called Sporttrade in the Philly area. We are just about to launch our app in the summer of this year. So I was the first UX research hire at the company, working with a small product design team there. And in terms of my background and how I got here, I came out of college with some skills that were relevant to UX, but I wasn't really aware of it as a field. So I graduated with a degree in media arts and design and technical communication. So my first couple of jobs were more in the marketing communications realm, doing things like creating marketing collateral, a little bit of design, a little bit of writing and editing, sort of technical content for a technology company. And I did that for a few years before I kind of realized how I could apply some of those interests to UX one of my employers started building a sort of a dashboard for their customers, taking this huge like data set that they had and just on some assumptions that people were going to want to use this dashboard. So I got pulled in to do like, hey, just, give us some fonts and some colors, like put a visual finish on it. And I think I just started asking some like meddlesome questions about like, are we sure people really want this chart on the homepage? Is this jargon that we're using going to make sense? And then like, let's even back up a second, like, are people going to want to use this tool? So I think that was kind of a moment for me where I realized that these skills and interests that I had could be applied to UX. So I was fortunate enough at that time to have that employer sponsor me in a part-time boot camp with General Assembly, which helped me get my first real full-time UX job at an agency. From there, I ended up moving to Philly in 2018 and got a job with Think Company. So worked in UX consulting with Think Company for about 4 years. Ended up focusing more in the UX research realm there, and then jumped over to Sporttrade last fall. One piece of advice I would say, staying flexible in your research approach and mindset. Like when I came out of that program at General Assembly, you learn about like, this is sort of the UX research process. This is how things go. This is a great portfolio piece that you come out of the program with. And you quickly learn once you get into the real world that there's a lot of constraints that the boot camper course might not have included. So yeah, I think just there's a lot of things that you have to be flexible about. I think we'll talk a little bit about that later on in the panel as well.
That's great advice, being open to flexibility. I feel like that's something that's not just specific to, the research side of the design industry, but just I think probably every job in general out there. Like you kind of learn the ideal when you're going through and getting your formal education, and then when you get thrown to the wolves, you start to realize that a lot of the constraints are just so much more apparent out there. So that's great. Thanks for that advice, Adam. And the other thing I want to point out is, when PhillyCHI put this panel together, they really worked hard to get folks who are working for different kinds of organizations as well. So we have folks who are in-house, we have folks who are working for consultancies, we have people who kind of had both experience and transition from one to the other. So I think that's also a great range to understand. We're probably not all going to agree on everything that we go through here. You're going to hear different perspectives. And that goes back to the message that Adam was talking about, where this idea of flexibility and really just understanding the constraints of the organizations you're working with, the clients you're working with, are so important. So thanks everyone for those great introductions. The next thing we're going to go into, just to give everyone a little bit of background for the folks who registered for the event. If you registered up through, I think it was Friday, there were a couple of questions that you may have answered. And we spent some time with those questions, the free response questions that people did. We did some synthesis work on that. We've kind of categorized those into 4 different groups of questions. Because we have a little bit more time, I might be going to more panelists, but originally we're going to ask a question, have 2 panelists fill in for it, and then move on to the next one. But we've got plenty of time. So I think we might be able to hear more than just 2 panelists' perspectives per question. So the first, excuse me while I look away from the camera at my notes. The first category of questions that we had was really around the education and training that folks recommended. I think we heard a little bit about that with the boot camp experience and also the formal education and background that folks have had. But the question here is, what kind of recommendations would you make to folks trying to enter into UX research, or if they were just entering the design industry? And I think the first person that we'll hand this over to is Sanchita, if you want to start.
Sure, absolutely. So like I'd mentioned, I've transitioned over into the industry, and when I came over to the industry, the assumption was, oh, because you've got formal research training, you understand everything and you know everything. Well, that's certainly not the case, which is why I said, everyone's background has some skills that are transferable. And that's the beauty of the UX field, really, that it is very multidisciplinary. So there's no linear path or one size fits all approach in terms of education or training to get into the UX research field. So the suggestions that I offer are going to be similar to some others, but also different because everyone has their own approach of, how you could get into the field. So the first thing I would recommend is read and learn. Learning never stops. To be honest, you can never know enough in any field, I guess. So I would recommend reading books like Just Enough Research, Think Like a UX Researcher, Design of Everything, Everyday Things by Don Norman, read Medium articles. I'm a huge People Nerds newsletter fan. D-Scout is actually the one who puts that together. And people mentioned boot camps. There are courses available online, so I would, take those on LinkedIn or wherever else, Coursera. But just, if you're passionate about the UX research field, there are so many skills that you can read and teach yourself. And the second thing I would say is you actually don't need formal advanced research training. If you really feel like you're interested in UX research and love learning about people, asking why, then go do a project on your own. Learn by doing. Look for local labs, groups, universities, NGOs that conduct applied research, and you can take on a project with them, volunteer with them, and see if you can get experience through that way. If you're doing a bachelor's, try co-op programs to get a feel for how things are in the industry. So there's a lot of different ways you can go about entering this industry, but those are just some ways that I could think of.
That's excellent advice, and I especially like the as someone, you have a PhD, correct, Sanchita? Yeah, so someone with a super advanced degree, a terminal degree, is saying you don't need to have this deep background in research. At the same time, I used to talk a lot at Temple University's College of Liberal Arts because that's where I came through. I don't have a formal design background, but I help run a design firm, and I talked to them. I say, anyone with a liberal arts background, that you've been trained in looking at the world, observing the world, and reacting to it. Whether you've got a degree in English or economics or anthropology, and that's really what a UX researcher does. So, thank you for that advice. But I also think that the advanced work that you've done in your degree has probably helped you guide other folks as they're working through their research careers. So thank you so much for that. Now for a different perspective, to go to a career changer, I'm going to switch it over to Suzanne, because Suzanne, you sort of went the boot camp path. Interestingly enough, as a UX researcher, you thought it was important to study code and learn that side of the business. So can you talk a little about that with us?
Yeah, when I was just standing at the precipice of leaving an 18-year career, what I did pretty well, it was terrifying. And to try to think about explaining what you do and your skill set, because it's such a different world. Production is a wholly different world. It just doesn't operate in the same way. And so they don't trust that you have any actual tangible skills. They're not sure what happens there when the TV shows come together. And I thought I would just not, I wanted to learn, first of all, but I just thought I was not going to be able to have any legitimate conversations or be taken seriously if I did not have my hands in code. I convinced myself of that. And so I thought, what do I have time to do, time and resources to do right now? And yeah, they were selling the boot camps pretty hot. They actually did not have a UX. I did it also full stack development because they didn't have a UX in Philly at the time that I was looking. It was in New York. And so I tried to do sort of a combined. And so I used it and did the Philly course. It took me maybe like 6 months in total to get through that whole section. But they were really actually for the faults that that program that entry has, we had an amazing instructor who, was just very, very helpful. And we were placed in all of, you heard a couple of folks mention all of the networking. We had the most fabulous networking events that I got to meet people who did what I was interested in doing. And I met, I don't know if anybody remembers Joel Eden, who was at many of the events for PhillyCHI and Research Rewind, who I had long conversations. He had worked with, production on the West Coast and Disney and things like that. It was individuals like that who really helped me see the connections, and lots of other folks who were leaving production at the time too, see the connections with that skill sets from all of those soft skills, being able to manage a team, being able to do, all of what I'm good at doing in qualitative interviewing now came from all of my years of doing that in production. And it was a matter of just pivoting my approach. And when I had many of those conversations at meetups, I met people at various, known companies around Philly, and those were the ones who were telling me, it's just not going to work out. You're going to need to go back. You're going to need to get a graduate degree, and you're going to need to come in through a traditional path. And it was so disheartening to hear that, because I just didn't have, that just wasn't going to be able to happen if it had to happen that way for me. So I just kept sort of tunneling through to try to find, how I could get there and match my skill set. And it's the networking alone is really what got there. And Joel taking me aside and saying, "You're a storyteller. This is what you do. You're finding these insights. You're turning those into recommendations for your clients, and you can map that." And what I ended up doing is a lot of self-education. I mean, people are asking for the book recommendations. There's so many. I mean, there's just go on the internet. I'm sure that they'll provide you a list. But anything that you can really wrap your head around design thinking, human-centered design, anything like that, just really stew in that, learn it. That's the fundamental basis of everything. And then you have to do, I think it was more about that self-assessment, really doing a self-inventory and saying, what do I know that I bring to the table? And then find the things that can enhance that. And so I wasn't able to, go through, the academic approach where I can have, to rock out in the data on the quantitative side with all of that under my belt. But I can really, use my skill set for the qualitative. And it's so great because now I get to work in a company that has a team, and it comes down to the balance of the team. And some of my best experiences are working with my buddy who is, came from academia and has the PhD, and she's handling, one aspect of the research, I'm handling the other, and we work beautifully together. And that's, the beauty of UX research is that you're on these balanced teams, and you make amazing research together because you're drawing on your skill set and the things that you're good at. So I hope that answers the question.
I think it does. I have a follow-up question for you, but before actually, let me give you the follow-up question first, because I forgot what was going to interrupt it. So I'm not taking notes, and I'm going all over the place. So the thing that I find interesting about your pathway, though, is that you've got this background in production, and then you thought UX was the way to go. You studied code, you worked your way in. But can you talk a little bit about like the decision point and how you developed the skill set specifically around research? Like what was that part of the journey look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, when I got out of the boot camp and I was looking at opportunities to, I knew that by the time I got that close, I had already knew that being a full-time developer wasn't going to be it, because I was literally trying to get out of a day-to-day where I'm spending my days in a dark edit room, staring at at media to sitting in a staring at code. I just wanted to shake up my day a little bit and get it back to sort of where I was out in the field and back with people and that sort of thing, and the life that I enjoy. So I sort of knew it was in that direction. And I just really tried to, I did a lot of self-education during that time, but I was looking for opportunities specifically, and I was networking like a madman, and looking in my network, working everyone that I possibly knew for anything that was a startup or in its infancy, or maybe like a crusty old company who was like, well, we're thinking about that newfangled UX approach to things. And so I did end up, I got a lucky break, and I made a very, there was a lot of intention in the deal that I made to be able to get in and say, we're thinking about having a brand new UX approach in our company. I said, I am you know, you can pay me what you want, we can work something out. And so I basically had to step way back, right, professionally, but to be able to make that trade-off to gain the skill set. And so I came on board with all of the knowledge of what I could do, and I laid it all out there as honestly as I could. I did not do any sort of, I didn't fluff it up all that much, really. I just sold them because I had all these conversations and a lot of practice in the networking circles that I've been in, and say, I can, you know, if you need to understand who your users are, I worked in casting. I can find you anybody throughout the contiguous United States and globally. I can find your person. Okay, great. But can you ask them questions? Absolutely. What can you do? I can do recordings with my cell phone. I'm able to do all of these things, get information back, have it in-house, cut a highlight reel, get it to your developers. I understand their language now because I just got out of boot camp for full stack development. And you just have to sell what you know. If you have a skill set, I was able to talk fast and get in there and make the trade-off. And it's like, okay, well, we'll do this, and we'll hire you at this junior level, and then we'll give you free reign to be able to try it out. And there's less risk for them in that way. So I think that there are opportunities like that, and I think that they are. I mean, it's just the endless. I mean, you see all the opportunities coming up in job time. They're so varied and different. So you can't look at one opportunity that you were a terrible fit for, or they didn't want you at all, and say that's going to be representative of others that you're going to find. You just have to really mine for that, where they're going to get your foot in the door, and then really just sell yourself for the things that you know that you do well. And then, and that ended up being my laboratory. So we had like a $5 budget. I was able to do all sorts of, try all the best practices and all the methodologies, and get all of that skill under my belt. So it was a good deal for both of us in that first gig. Yeah.
Well, that's great, and I love the part of that story where you had worked in casting. If anyone in the audience has been in any kind of media production and has been through like casting sessions or any that kind of stuff, like the parallels between casting and recruiting for research are like phenomenal. There's a strong connection there. You're just working with different agencies and stuff like that. But I totally understand where you're coming from there, Suzanne. And that's this is this notion of if you are a career changer, so we have people who are just starting out in their careers, and we have folks who are career changers, like there are these transferable skills that you have that you may not recognize, and being an advocate for yourself, like Suzanne was talking about, is really important in doing that. And I'll say one more thing before we go to the next question, and maybe talk to Melanie and Adam a little bit. And this is the thought that I forgot previously. If you've worked in an industry where you've dealt with clients or you've dealt with stakeholders and you have that sort of client management skill, and then you want to enter into design or UX or research or something like that, the interesting thing is you already have the skill set that I think people who enter the industry, who are just starting out in their careers, that's one of the things they trip up on the most. They may be they may be the most excellent designers or researchers, but they get tripped up by ordinary stakeholders or clients who are very particular about what they want, what they get. And it's kind of like, we sort of have this joke with people that I work with. If you've never worked in the service industry, if you never like waited on tables or something like that, like you kind of don't know how to deal with people who are like, or in retail or wherever where you've got angry customers, then you may trip up a little bit when you're dealing with clients who are very specific about what they want. So these are the kinds of skills that can transfer over. So that's great. Thank you so much for that, Suzanne and Sanchita. I'm going to switch over to Melanie to talk a little bit about, and I think you touched on this in your introduction, but sort of breaking into the industry, what kind of preparation beyond just being ready for those informational interviews would you recommend folks to do?
Yeah, so Sanchita had mentioned doing a lot of reading. I did tons of reading, everything by a book apart, again, Medium articles, just trying to learn as much as I could. I also was lucky enough to work with a career coach, Sarah WB, who runs Active Voice, and working with her was incredible. I think coming from veterinary medicine and trying to describe those transferable skills, how they match up with UX research skills, was difficult for me at first, but working with Sarah was incredible. I think if you're able to find someone that's able to help you find your UX voice, that's a great place to start too.
That's great. Yeah. So, and wow, how grateful you must be to have Sarah as a coach as you were developing this.
She's incredible. I love her.
Yeah. Yeah. Adam, as you were, you sort of had this circuitous route into this as well with your background in media and communications, and if you can talk a little bit about like how you prepared for for these roles, and then you just recently had another sort of like not career change, but change in organization, the type of organization, stuff like that. So how would you recommend folks prepare for those kinds of transitions?
Sure. Yeah. My first UX job, you're always in that struggle of like, you need a good portfolio, but how do you get a portfolio before you have a job? That's not just your coursework or your boot camp work. So I guess I want to say like, fake it till you make it. I think a few things Suzanne said in kind of like tying your past career to your UX interviews, where it's like, yes, I have all these transferable skills from my previous career that translate really well to UX research. I love that idea. And when I interviewed for my first UX jobs, I touched on one of my employers who had started building a dashboard, and I just kind of injected UX into the process. Like we didn't have any, I was working in marketing. We didn't have any UX designers, any UX researchers, but I just sort of like took initiative to take what was asked of me and turn that into a pseudo UX user research effort, and put some process and some UX design into what was being asked of me in that marketing job, and turn that into a portfolio piece that I was able to speak to when I started interviewing with companies for a UX job. Even though I was just coming out of a UX boot camp, my sort of real world experience was something from this marketing job that I was able to just speak to in my interviews. And then my more recent shift from I was at Think Company as a consultant in the field, and then got a job with a startup going in-house as a UX research lead. One thing that came to mind there, Phil, was as I kind of looked through the job description for the role I have now, there were certain bullet points that just really, like I could see my experience and my skills coming through in what was being asked of the job description. So I think it's always a good thing if you can tailor your sort of cover letter or resume to that role. Not anything crazy, but if a recruiter or a hiring manager is looking for something like establishing a research practice and growing a team, and you did that with a previous client, let's highlight that and talk that up in your application.
That's great advice, and that's something that that we touch on every time we do this. That I really want to repeat, and that is, I don't know where this is coming from, but very often, at least, and I'm not involved in the hiring process at Think Company anymore, but I know this still happens. Folks will apply for, fill out whatever the web form is for whatever job it is, not just a Think Company, and they won't provide a cover letter, or they'll just say like their name or something like that. And we've done this before with hiring managers, and hiring managers will say, we read your cover letter because that is an example of how you communicate. It's an example of your written communication. Your resume is not a good example of that. Your portfolio is sort of this packaged piece that tells us a story about yourself, but your cover letter lets me know what kind of a communicator you are. And people are really shocked by that sometimes in these sessions that we have, because there's someone out there who's saying like, don't bother with cover letters. But I love that advice, Adam, of read the job description, customize the cover letter to that. What's it going to take? A half an hour for you to do that. And the hiring manager or the HR manager is going to be able to look through that cover letter and learn a little bit more about you and understand how you fit into the job better than your resume or your portfolio is going to say sometimes.
Yeah, and also if you're, if it's a company or an industry that you're really excited about, let that come through too. Like don't get deterred if you don't hit every bullet point that's in the job description. That's, companies are never going to find the ideal candidate. But if you are really excited and passionate about the industry, I think that's another way to kind of get an edge among a pool of candidates.
Yep.
I'll add one tiny other piece there. Push back a little, because I found through experience that the hiring manager or the folks talking about the UX position maybe don't have a full understanding of it. Maybe the job description has nothing to do with what the company actually needs. Get in there, know yourself well, say, what is it that you actually need that you're calling this thing, and you've got this list of things and expectations. Here's what I can give you. Now challenge me why I can't, bring value to your company. So I would say, there are certainly folks out there who know exactly what they want precisely, but there's always room for negotiation there to find out what is it that you're looking for. I understand that you have this like pre-digested job description, but push back a little bit.
No, I think that's a great point. Job descriptions are very often templated, and just reposted and not necessarily rewritten for each individual job that's there. So I think it does make a lot of sense to try and get as much information as you possibly can, push back a little bit against it. That makes a lot. I totally agree with that. Sanchita, I believe you're in a management position, correct? So you've hired folks. What do UX research portfolios look like? Or if there are no portfolios for UX research, like what kind of artifacts are you looking for from candidates to really understand their skill set? I'm kind of putting you on the spot for this. I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this question, but hopefully you've got some response.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I can help answer that. Whether you need a UX research portfolio or not is something that I want to address first. I think the point that you brought up about having cover letters with resumes, honestly, I think cover letters is what I read through when we're reviewing candidates. UX research portfolio, honestly, what we look for is more if you're able to talk through the process you went through when you were working on a project, how you can articulate what you did in the most concise way possible. We're also looking to understand an individual's storytelling skills. Something that Suzanne mentioned is something that, is another transferable skills, especially in UX research, because once you have analyzed the data, to convince your stakeholders about what you learned and communicate that story so that they, are able to drive outcomes or use your recommendations into the product and take action on that data is a powerful thing. And so those are some of the things that we look for, to be honest. I've looked at portfolios, which are essentially just a picture or two with UX researchers just talking about their process, their method, how they came up with the idea of choosing one method over the other. So you should be able to, draw pros and cons of one method over the other method, talk about your sampling approach, just a few bullet points about what you learned, but essentially what did it do after, right? So those are the sort of things that we're looking for when somebody, does a portfolio deep dive. We're not necessarily looking for a good looking, at least not at Vanguard, right? Like, I don't know what the other firms are looking at, but we don't in our company look for a beautiful looking portfolio. It's more about your thought processes and how you articulate what you did and how you did what you did that we're looking for.
Absolutely. I second that all the way. Everything she said.
Yeah, being able to tell your story. And I tell this to folks who are asking for advice on their portfolios all the time. Like, hey, your portfolio doesn't need to be as beautiful as you think it needs to be. Sometimes telling the story and showing like, here's the ugliness of my original sketches in my notebook, or how we were synthesizing all of the research that we had and, the crazy Post-it note photographs and all that kind of stuff that we're doing. And then showing how it all synthesizes down into the final deliverables is really, that tells the story better than, just showing beautiful wireframes or something like that. Melanie, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, just because the thing that I love about your story is, you started to educate yourself in this transition in the middle of a pandemic. And then, you got this job in the middle of the pandemic at Vertex. So like, what kind of assets did you put together or did you prepare for that journey?
Yeah.
And did you use them, or did you do too much work, or just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time on my portfolio, and I think you had just mentioned, Phil, that your portfolio is never going to be perfect. So don't spend a ton of time on it. Something that I did for my interview with Vertex, though, is I came up with a slide deck, and I'm happy to share this with anyone out there that is also interested in this, that kind of showed my journey from veterinary medicine through hospital coordination to where I am now. And that was a really great way for me to share more about myself and not control the narrative, but also, I don't know, I think as a new UX researcher, I was pretty nervous interviewing. And I think going through a presentation made me feel a lot calmer. And I feel like I was able to bang out a lot of answers to questions that hiring managers had.
That's great. And I'm not going to open up the debate about doing a, like a project for a job interview versus something else. I know, like we've had this debate many times here, and people there are people who feel very passionately about it. The end result of this is that some kind of a presentation is usually expected of a candidate as they're going through the process. And again, this goes back to communication style, how you tell your story and things like that. We like at Think Company, we recently changed the way that we put people through that in the interview process, because there were folks who interpreted these like little mini projects that we're asking them to do as free work, which is not what we were asking them to do. So now you have an option to do a project or to do a presentation that you've already done somewhere else, which is, and it could be something you did in your boot camp, it could be something you did in your previous job or something, but it's more of the organizations that you're working for need to understand what your presentation style is and what your communication style is and stuff like that. And that's, I don't know if anybody here disagrees with that, but that's kind of an expectation of the job, just like a portfolio is an expectation of the job. So I don't know if anybody debates that or, but preparing for that, Melanie, and being able to go and make that presentation, that's the kind of thing that that a prospective employer is really looking for.
I 100% agree with what you just said, Phil, and I will add that when interview process, you keep tweaking as with the responses that you hear, and as you sort of go through the process of getting more people in the pipeline, so on and so forth. So we've adapted our process quite a bit, but what we've landed on now is actually working really well. We have case study instead of a presentation. So we'll just share a scenario with you, and it's a discussion that you would normally have with your stakeholders. So it's more about your analytical capabilities and your a candidate's ability to think on their feet, which is very much like the real life scenario that you would experience when you're working as a UX researcher in the industry, where you're working with like a product owner and different disciplines. Everyone's bringing their own set perspective and questions to a group. And so you just have to be able to think on your feet, ask questions, probe a little bit to sort of narrow down the scope and then determine the method. So that's the approach that we've landed at, and it's working really well.
That's great.
And
that's great.
Just to chime in there, I was thinking too, one thing that I had to do for a presentation for my last hire was just, well, it's amazing how many of the soft skills you need, the presentation skills, because you think it's enough to just like, I was so smart and I thought through this process and we came to some great, insights there, but you have to be able to present that, right? Because they're counting on you to be able to convince clients. But the third pillar I think that played in there, especially for me too, is advocacy for the research. I feel like that's like the sprinkles on the cupcake. If you can do those things and you can prove somehow or talk through somehow, how you were up against something, but you had to prove the value of the research, then that's like chef's kiss. I think, that's what you could aspire to.
100%. Have a point of view, you should be able to stand up for your research and the learnings and your method. Having a point of view is, absolutely 100% very important.
Yeah, I remember a designer, I was once jurying a bunch of student projects at for a university program. And one of the students presented something, and the workflow that they were presenting in this UX project, there was just this gap in it. It just seemed odd why the workflow was working in the order it was. And I asked the it's a long story, but I asked the professor on the side, like, hey, do you know why he did that? He did it this way. He goes, oh, ask him. You're going to get a great answer. And the student came back in the room after we had done this debrief, and I said, hey, this seems like a weird disconnect in the workflow. Why does it go this way? And he got very animated and excited because he had analyzed all the APIs for the platform that he was designing this thing for. And he said, actually, I need these 3 pieces of data before I can do this thing over here, because the APIs, they're a mess. And without that data, even though I don't need it, I have to ask those questions. And so I'm forced to do this in the workflow, even though it doesn't fit in there. But the fact that he was so excited and animated and so deep in the technology for that told me, oh, he's that kind of a designer, right? And he's going to be really great at talking to the engineering side of things because he was able to dig deep into the APIs, which not all designers can do that, but for this particular role, I got so excited about his passion and his ability to answer that question where I had challenged him that I went back to our hiring managers and I was like, hey, can you get this guy to come in and do his graduate program presentation for you, just so you can see it? And he now works at Think Company. So, but it was all based on that idea that, like, I challenged him and asked him, a really difficult question, a very challenging question. And rather than get defensive about it, he got excited. So I think that's like being able to see how people react to those kinds of things is really important in the hiring process. Well, that's great. Hey, one thing, we're moving to Q&A in 10 minutes. Oh, I'm behind. I thought we had a lot of time, and I guess we don't. Okay, so let me open up to everyone here, because I think I'm going to ask 2. Trying to think of which of these questions to hit. So let's go through and talk about the specialist versus generalist role in organizations. You are all in a specialist role, but you work for a variety of different size organizations. So if you can just give us your thoughts about, like, do you think what's important for someone trying to enter this career? Should they try to focus exclusively on being a UX researcher? Should they be looking in for like a kind of a hybrid role, or what are your thoughts about those 2 things between design and research? I'll hand it up to Sanchita first. I'm just going to move. I've got Sanchita, Suzanne, Adam, and Melanie on my screen, so we'll go in that order.
I can say I was in the camp where I was like, you have to be a specialist, you have to have, formal training. But as I've come to understand the field, I've moved into, like, if you see generalist versus specialist on a continuum, I'm now in the neutral category. And I honestly would answer it depends on a lot of factors. I think at this stage of the UX field, there's space for both generalists and specialists, to be honest. And in reality, it's a matter of what interests you the most in the UX field. Is it design? Is it research? So what I would argue for is more of T-shaped skills. Now, this might be a new term for some people. So T-shaped skills are basically you have broad knowledge about UX, information architecture, content, development, right? But then you have an area of specialty, something that you know really well, as opposed to you could be a jack of all trades, master of none, or you could be like this really specialized I-shaped person. I honestly think you need to have an idea of the UX field, even as a researcher, to be able to make recommendations, work with different disciplines and fields, to make the case for what might be the best approach in terms of the design or journey or product that you're working on. So that's the approach I would take now. But it really depends on what you're interested in and what which organization you're working in, and how mature that organization is UX wise.
Excellent. Okay, I'm going to hand it up to Suzanne and let her dive in for a second.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. I mean, I'm a a specialist generalist, right? I mean, because I'm a specialist because I'm a research only role, but I'm still a generalist in my role because there's further specialization within dedicated research roles, right? So I would say, I mean, I would echo the last sentiments. It depends, right? If you're in a small organization, you tend to be a jack of all trades. You have to do all the things. I personally, Suzanne's opinion is that I don't know that you can do both things at a high level in a very complex, fast moving, agile based, I don't think that you can do that well and do both things well. I think that you should be invested in both at all times though. And I think the teams that I work on now that are both, simultaneously part, the designers are upfront with the researchers as they're doing the discovery work. We are still there maintaining, holding the line at the end, the final mock-ups and presentations to make sure the design is echoing what we found in the research. So I feel like there's a relationship there that you should be involved together the whole time. I think for me, that's the ideal way to do that. But if you really like doing both, then do both. No one's going to stop you. But I do think it scales out at a certain point, and only just the thinking of the way that we tend to scope the projects, right? Because it's like, you at some point, and you're doing design iterations, and you have to do additional rounds of research, and then it's going to overlap with additional things that you have to do in the design. And I feel like those things start to glom up along the timeline. So I think that gets really tricky. My hat tips to those who can do that. I certainly have no plans on, working in Figma and creating top-notch, mock-ups in there, but I will do what I need to do to get that done. And with that, I will pass to the next panelist if they have a thought on the generalist specialist.
Yeah, that's great advice. And just to make the transition over to Adam, if you can talk about this, especially in the context of, working in a startup organization, smaller department as opposed to like a large organization or a consulting firm. I think there's a different perspective in there. And we can even touch on this idea of like, I suspect that you are continually trying to or needing to make the case for research in a smaller organization. So if you can talk a little about that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to kind of piggyback on one of Sanchita's thoughts at the end there of thinking about what type and size of organization you might want to work for. At least in my experience so far, like in this startup that I work for now, we have 4 total people on the whole product design team. So generalist skill sets are very valuable in terms of, designers who can participate in research or lead research, researchers who can take their findings and start to create low fidelity wireframes or even higher fidelity designs. So yeah, that's kind of the vibe that I get at an early stage startup, whereas at a larger consultancy or a larger established company like Vanguard, I imagine there's more kind of lanes for research specialists and even specialists within research. And yeah, the other piece of the experience so far in working with a startup, you mentioned making the case for research, Phil. In my experience, when I've had to make the case and advocate for research, I would say the first sort of foundational step there has been relationship building, kind of building rapport and building trust with the stakeholders and leaders that need to be bought in on research. So like if you say you're starting a new job or with a new client, let's say like go be a researcher and understand those people, like ask questions about kind of what their day-to-day is like and what is driving them. Get to know them on a personal level always helps kind of build that rapport. Yeah, then I think like once you have that level of trust, you can start to understand, okay, what is this department or business unit, like what are their business objectives and what does success look like for them? And then we can find a way to like tie our UX research and our UX work towards those objectives, like whether it's, sales or conversions or like new user adoption, retention, like those are all directly related to user experience most of the time. So you can kind of craft like, research plans that help work towards those business goals.
That's great advice, especially for making the case. So I think the last word before we go off to Q&A, and one of the reasons why we're rushing into Q&A is there's 19 questions in the Q&A bin, and I'm sure that more are going to erupt as we dive into that. So we're trying to push through this. But Melanie, sort of the last word on this around, both this idea of specialism, like generalist versus specialist, and also making the case in an organization since you work in-house in an organization.
Yeah. Sanchita had said there's room for both, and I totally agree. I work on a smaller team. There are 4 researchers, and we have, I think, 7 or 8 designers. So it's really important for the designers to be comfortable doing their own unmoderated usability testing, things like that. And we're happy to go over all of that data with them and help them synthesize that. But that's really helpful for us because we have a smaller team. As for getting buy-in, this is something that we're still working on. Our team, we are about 2 years old now. And it's like Adam said, getting to know your product managers. What do they want to see? What don't they want to see? What are they interested in? What are their goals? That has been a great way for us to just get to know them a little bit better and know what they're looking for. We have run into people not really wanting research or seeing research as a blocker. And that can be tricky, but we do the research anyways. We make incredible deliverables and present them still. And that is slowly bringing people on board with research. People are finally asking for us now, which is really exciting.
Yeah, and that's the goal, is getting folks to ask for it. And that's, I will say this, and I know this has made researchers cringe in the past, but this has worked very often back when I was a designer and not just a company administrator. But I've on multiple occasions had major stakeholders at clients that I've consulted with who've been resistant to research, just convince them, hey, let's just try this out. We just want to talk to like 3 or 4 people. And you know what, you can watch. Like, I'm not going to let you talk to the research subject, but why don't you sit and watch it anonymously over video, or sit there. And both times these folks who were resistant to it eventually would say, you remember when Jane said blah, blah, blah? Like, I really, I love the product, but like they would start to refer to the research participants by their first name. That would be the big piece of advice they would continue to quote. And then eventually they'd say, I need more people like Jane. I want their advice. I don't want to listen to all the other stakeholders here who have all their ideas that aren't vetted and things like that. I need the advice of the people who are using the platform. So I know it creates a lot of anxiety among researchers to say, like, hey, bring your stakeholders in, like bring them into the process and help them have them observe it and things like that. But eventually they become advocates for it if they can actually witness it. So I saw a couple people go off mute. I don't know if you wanted to add into that or tell me that I'm insane, but you're welcome to tell me I'm insane.
No, I couldn't agree more, Phil. I mean, at every opportunity. And to what I was going to add to that is go right for the top, because what I could do a whole other panel about fighting for the value of UX in an organization that really has no interest in it. And I fought a good fight for a long time. But if you can get top down, buy-in for that, and you just, you need to just go manage up for that. Because if you can successfully do that, and if you can have anything where they're participating and looking at it right, and then you can and then it trickles down from there. And I find that to be the most effective way. It's almost impossible the other way. No one's going to whisper down the lane up the ladder of any organization about the value of UX research. I mean, it really does have to start at the top, because it's a value that they have to spread from the top. So that would be my advice there.
Yep. But once they witness and experience it, then all of a sudden they become an advocate, and they're freeing up budget and time and recognizing just how important that value is. And I think, like, Sanchita over at Vanguard, like that years ago, they didn't care. I don't want to say they didn't care. It certainly wasn't it wasn't an organization that was as reliant on research as they are now. So, okay, we're going to dive into Q&A. I'm getting pinged here from folks on the PhillyCHI side. I want to make sure that and I think Kieran's going to help us facilitate this. So for everyone to understand, right now there's like 19 or 18 questions in the queue. In the Q&A feature, just make sure you're not putting questions in chat. You've got to put them in the Q&A feature. And there's also an upvote feature, and I don't think you can see on the participant side, but we can see how many votes each question has got. So if there's a question in there that you really want to hear the answer to, we're going to go just in order of how they've been upvoted. And I'm going to let Kieran take it away on this side.
Thanks, Phil.
Welcome
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely upvote, because that is how we are in the order that we're doing the questions in. So this one is really interesting. It was by far the most voted. And it's from Anonymous. The grass isn't always greener. If there was a warning label for those looking to become a UX researcher, what would it be?
I'll take that. If you really have a hard time enjoying spending time with people, talking to people, presenting to people, and being people facing, you might find it challenging. I think that you need to have, even if you are, a person who likes to hide in a dark room and crunch data and find trends and patterns, you need to be able to come out and put your presentation face on, which was actually a shock to me. I didn't realize that when I entered this. Because I was so super comfortable behind a camera telling people what to do as far as direction for productions. But I had to have, it was a huge learning curve for me to come out in front and be comfortable with presenting, because you have to do it frequently. I mean, constantly, all the time. So yeah, social, not all those soft skills and the presentation skills, and get over your social anxiety, I would say. Think about that one.
I'd just add, I mean, I echo that completely. And another thing I would add is, as UX researchers, you have to convince people about data quite a lot. So your convincing skills and your persuasion power is definitely something that comes handy. So if you are uncomfortable with that, then maybe not the space for you. You also have to be connector of dots and, constantly make patterns out of data. So that's another thing that we have to use a lot that, you don't realize, but convincing powers, you need a lot of those for UX research roles.
Great. Yeah. If Melanie or Adam have any other warnings for people who might be just getting into UX research?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I've learned is that you have to be nimble. You have to be, when you're doing interviews, sometimes they're going to go a completely different route, and you have to be ready for it. That's something that I've been learning along the way that I maybe wasn't totally expecting. But being flexible, super important.
Yeah, definitely agree with the flexibility and everything else that Suzanne and Sanchita mentioned. I don't think I have much to add on this one.
I just like to double down on what Melanie said. One of our researchers a long time ago helped me understand that a discussion guide is not a script; it's an outline, and you need to be able to bounce around it and let and that's something. And I know Adam is excellent at this as well, like because he worked at Think Company for a while doing this as well. But that the participant is really structuring the discussion. And as long as you can check all the points off that you want to discuss with them, let them choose the order that you're going to talk about things in.
And I'll just piggyback on that train of thought. You have to get comfortable with silences. It's fascinating once you've done enough interviews, echo everything that everyone's saying about being flexible. You just have to let the participant or the user sit with their thoughts a little bit and be okay if nothing's being said. And so you just have to be comfortable with with somebody not saying anything at all.
Totally. I think
you would have made a great producer. You would have made a fantastic producer, because that's the trick. You just sit and you smile and nod and you leave a horribly awkward pause, and then they will always fill it with good stuff.
I think when I first got into the field, I observed some interviews where I thought like, oh, this really talkative facilitator, like this person is really good at this. But then I realized that no, do less. Like just stop talking sometimes and let the participant elaborate.
Those are all great answers. Thank you, guys. So the next one is from Faye, and I think we covered it a bit during the discussion, but if you have any kind of final thoughts, what should an early career researcher know to be a good job candidate?
One thing we didn't touch on earlier that I look for when interviewing candidates is, I would say, a combination of like humility and curiosity. Obviously, being a researcher, like you want to be curious about your team, your role, your users, your leadership, your stakeholder, like all of that. Just I think curiosity in this field goes a long way, and just yeah, staying humble and kind of knowing what you don't know, being open to feedback is a great skill for UXers in general.
I completely agree. That was actually something that I was going to point out as well. Curiosity is another thing that we look at. Somebody who's always willing to dig deeper, ask why, what, when, how, questions when they look at data, when they see people doing something, always being willing to probe and understand why people are behaving the way they're behaving, why they're thinking the way they're thinking. And then growth mindset is another thing that I would add. Just be okay saying I don't know, and then go back and look it up and learn about it and read about it. So those are some of the other things. Be open to learning constantly.
I totally agree with Sanchita. I find myself, I mean, I've been with Vertex for about a year now, but there are definitely times where I don't know what to say. But I feel really lucky that I work on a team where people are really supportive. And this is something that I've kind of learned with the UX community, especially in Philadelphia, is that people want you to succeed. They want to answer your questions. And people understand if you don't know the answer, and that's okay.
Awesome. The next question is from Nathan, who is an early developer and wants to learn how to collaborate well with UX researchers. Do you work with software developers, and do you have challenges with communication with them?
Sure. I used to have those challenges because it's the eternal question. Do you want to build the product right, or do you want to build the right product? And I feel like that's just always the conversation I would have. It's like, you can be really smart and do lots of bells and whistles in that, but is it something that is validated by something that's required by the user or wanted by the user? So, it's if you're both thinking in a human-centered way, and you're both thinking about the end experience for the person who is interacting with your product or service or technology, then that's really the key. It's not really, it's not about what you can do. It's more about why you're doing it. And I think that if you can both get on that page, then you're on the right track.
Great. We will do one more question. And this is another one that I think we did touch on just hearing from everyone's background, but if you have any kind of, again, final thoughts on this or anything you didn't talk about, do you have, this is from Adam, do you have advice for how to make the case for an atypical background for UX research roles? So I think that means if you're coming from an atypical background into UX research.
I don't know that there is a typical background. I mean, I feel like there are so many transferable skills. I mean, I came from veterinary medicine working as a vet tech, and there are so many transferable skills to UX research. So I think even like changing your mindset, anyone can be a UX researcher.
Perfect. All right, well, thank you so much for answering some of the Q&A questions, and thank you everyone who submitted questions. And if you didn't get your question answered, or if you want to review these answers, we will have a Q&A doc that we'll share out in our event recap email. And I believe with that, we're going to pass it to Resha for our raffle winners.
Thank you, Kieran, and thank you to all the panelists and Phil for such an engaging and very insightful panel discussion. So moving on to the raffle winners, I do have the 3 raffle winners with me. So the first one is Vivian NG. Our second winner is Matt Keller, and our third winner is Dolma Sherpa. Congratulations, you guys. As Laura mentioned before, we will follow up by email to get your addresses and send these awesome Rosenfeld books to you, no matter where you are in the world. But also a heads up that it might take a little while because of the COVID delays. So moving on to the next slide. So for our next event, we have our another popular event, which is the Design Slam. And it's going to happen on May 11, 2022. And it's a part of the PhillyCHI Tech event. So mark your calendars and also keep your eyes and ears open because the registration is going to start very soon. And as we all know, seats are going to get filled up very fast. So grab your ticket fast. And also for now, this event is in person, but depending on how COVID is during the time of the event, it might move to a virtual event as well. Last but not the least, we are also currently seeking sponsors and non-profit partners for this event. So if you know of any great cause that you would like to solve a problem for, please let us know by sending us an email at phillychi@gmail.com. And now I'll pass it on to Ben to wrap up.
Thank you, everyone. I don't know about you all, but that was an amazingly deep and insightful conversation into UX research. And I personally appreciate the depth of experience and expertise across the panel, as well as their opinions on the topics, as well as Phil Charron's expert moderation as always. And with that, I thank you all for attending. And again, keep your eyes and ears out in the next couple of days for our post-event recap email, in which you will have links to all the jobs, the networking sheet, as well as the questions and answers. And thank you all for attending. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and stay connected.